Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to go over how to make your practice yours. It's your body, you live in it, you have the experience. I'm guiding you along the way. I'm telling you certain alignment cues to get you in a kind of shape that should be in, right? We can't just have people doing whatever they feel like, because who knows if it's beneficial or not. But I'm going to, as I guide you through different places, there's certain parts about your body, there's certain parts about your skeletal system, about your ligaments, about your experiences you've had in your body that lead you to do the posture slightly different. So I'm going to lead you through a couple things to help you find more ease in your practice, maybe more stability in your standing poses or balancing poses, and then in return finding more mindfulness and awareness with your body, with your breath, with your yoga practice. So I'm just kind of guiding you along the way. You're the one that's actually the teacher. You're the one that's building that awareness and checking in with the body and saying, hey, this doesn't feel quite right, or oh my gosh, that feels so good. So I'm going to give you quite a few different variations. Try them, see how they feel. At the end, we'll go through a little bit of a flow. But before we get there, let us take some time just to center and be mindful. So find a comfortable seat. Sit up nice and tall, lengthen up through the spine, find a neutral spine. Draw the head slightly back and just allow your eyes to close. You bring yourself into the room, onto your mat, and into your body. Connecting with your surroundings, allowing those to be acknowledged so that they become part of your practice rather than a distraction in your practice. And then scan over the body, checking in, acknowledging the areas of tightness, concern, any injuries or fatigue, any areas that feel a little bit more open today. And then check in mentally. Acknowledge where you are there, acknowledging what kind of day it's been, maybe what type of week it's been. And then take a deep inhale. And as you let that go, let all that go. Leave that outside your mat. Allow yourself to be here with your body, with your breath, building that awareness to make your practice your own today. And we'll set our intention of making our practice our own, building that awareness, whatever you need to do to have yourself be fully present in your practice today. Let that take form in your mind's eye as you bring your palms to press in front of the heart. We'll set that intention as we open this practice together with one Om. Take a nice full inhale. Keeping your eyes closed, let your hands come back down to the thighs and just pause there for a moment. Let that settle in. And then slowly allow those eyes to blink open. So I invite you today to be curious, become aware of what feels good, what doesn't feel good. We're going to talk a little bit also about compression and tension when we get into certain spots. Compression, you can't go anymore. Compression is bone on bone, or maybe you have a special issue that's going on in your body, something that makes you unique. Or then you have tension, which is muscles or fascia or ligaments just aren't letting you stretch, right? And again, that's unique to your body. So keep those things in mind. I'll be referring to them as we go through these different variations and modifications. So when you're ready, gather your props, have them ready, maybe have a chair nearby that you might need, and take a nice deep inhale and exhale. So we are going to start sitting. Super easy. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to notice how we sit, right? So you found a comfortable seat right now, but I'm going to ask you to get uncomfortable. I'm going to ask you to sit up. If you're already sitting on a cushion, I want you to sit on 3 cushions. So I want you to take yourself up 2 times higher than you are now, just to see how that feels. So if you have blocks or cushions or whatever, you're going to sit yourself up on those. So I'm going to sit myself up on a block and the blanket. So that's going to take me 2 times higher. And then when you sit, I want you to sit with your right ankle in front of your left ankle. So not your shins, but your ankle. So your right ankle in front of your left ankle. See how that feels. Does that feel better or worse than the hips? All right, just kind of notice as you're sitting up, can you sit up in a more neutral spine this way? Does it allow you to actually lift your chest without rounding and putting compression into the low back? All right, just kind of notice. And then lean back, switch your ankles. Put your left one in front and see how that feels. Maybe this feels better and you never knew it. You're like, oh, wow, this actually feels better. All right. Then what I want you to do, same idea, you're going to take your right shin, cross it in front of your left shin. So it's going to be slightly narrower, right? So instead of those knees going out wide, it's slightly narrower. And I notice when I make my knees narrower, I'm actually able to sit up taller. I have noticed this. Like I find it easier to lift my chest because when my hips get out too wide, I tend to round forward for some reason. Just kind of notice. And then take your left shin, cross it in front of your right shin. So you're a little narrower in your stance. And just notice. Good, so when you start to notice these things, you can close your eyes, you can keep them open. I tend to close my eyes. It tends to help me feel my body more. It takes away that sight sense, and I'm able to then notice my physical body. Yeah, and then from here you're gonna come down so you've been on something, so you know what it's like to be on something in between. You know what it's something to be like up high. Now go all the way down to the floor. So you're gonna sit all the way on the floor, and some of you already are gonna know, oh my gosh, I don't like sitting all the way on the floor. And start off, stay with that right shin in front of your left shin. So that right shin's in front of your left shin, and just sit there. So you might start to notice this is tighter in the back. You might start to round forward a little bit. You might struggle to sit up tall. You're really using those spine muscles along the spine, those erector spinae. Just kind of notice. We could probably hold this for a few breaths, but we might get tired if we have to sit here for a while. So then, take that left shin in front. See how that feels? And just notice. And depending on your hips, right? One hip might be tighter than the other, so the one that's behind, it doesn't have to work as hard as the leg that's in front. And then if it's applicable to you, if you can do this, see if you can bring and cross your ankles. So you're just gonna make those knees a little bit wider, right? So either crossing your ankles or drawing your heels more toward your pubic bone so your knees go wider, and see how that feels. All right, when I notice this, my right knee always goes down all the way. My left knee likes to hover because my left side's a little bit tighter. All right, I know that about my body. And then switch it around. Have the opposite foot in front and see what happens. All right, so as my left leg comes in, my knee's allowed to drop a little bit. My right leg is a little hovered, but not as much as my right. So just noticing those things about your body. Good, so just kind of make some mental notes. Like, all right, so maybe you like heels in, maybe you like ankles in, maybe you like shins, right? So just kind of notice that when a teacher says come to a comfortable seat, now you kind of know what your comfortable seat might be, right? I know I always like to sit on something when it's comfortable, unless we're in actually a practice. If we're starting to move, I tend to come down a little bit just because I know I'm not going to be there as much. But if you have low back issues, if you have protruding discs, if you have slip discs, then you're going to want to prop yourself up on something. If you have hip issues, like if you're going through arthritis in the hip, if you have a hip replacement, you're going to want to lift your hips a little bit just so it's better on your hips and on your knees. So just being mindful of that when you're going into sitting. All right, so now we're going to go into kneeling. So we come to those kneeling poses, right? So your first kneeling pose, you're going to sit up on 2 times your height, right? So you're going to take maybe a block, maybe 2 pillows, prop them up really high. So you're going to slide those between your ankles, and you're going to sit back. So you're up really high, right? So there's literally no pressure on your ankles whatsoever, right? So you're sitting up so high that you feel like you're on a throne, right? So you should be up so high that you feel very little tension in your ankles, in your knees, right? If you still feel tension in your knees, maybe you have some arthritis in your knees, maybe you're going through and you have knee surgery or you have something going on there and it hurts, just sit cross-legged, right? That's going to always be your option. But you feel up nice and tall, right? You feel comfortable. So when we have those positions where we're sitting up tall, this can be where you are. So we're going to go between kneeling and child's pose with support, right? So you feel very supported here. Your knees can be wide, they can be narrow, whatever, again, feels best to your hips. So then we're going to come forward to child's pose, but I'd like you to place either a block or a pillow underneath your head. So we kind of did this last time. So you're going to lengthen out just a little bit. Bring your hands just in front of you, so your elbows are going to kind of bend to the side, and rest your forehead on that pillow or block. So it's kind of like you're just bowing forward, right? And just notice how that feels in the spine. Your spine might feel a little bit longer. It might feel a little bit easier to breathe, right? With just that little bit of lift away from the floor. It might feel easier in the hips for those hips to actually get back to your heels. You might even be able to relax the shoulders a little bit more. And then still keeping the head on the block, walk those hands forward, see how that feels. Can you feel more length in your spine this way? Can you actually send your hips back more while your head is resting on something? And then finally, just notice how it feels to bring those hands back toward your feet. This one might feel the most awkward. You might have too much pressure on your head. Or maybe this feels the best for you. Just kind of notice. Hands back is always going to have a little bit more pressure in the hips and knees, so be mindful of that. And then bring those hands back out equal with your shoulders. And then shift your weight forward. Take yourself off one cushion and sit back down on those heels or between the feet and see how that feels. So we've gone down a level. Notice how that feels. And again, if it ever gets too tight, adjust as you need, do what you need. Good, and then just check in. Take away maybe one padding there. And then again, come forward, bring your head down to the block. Maybe it's still too low. Maybe you adjust it. Maybe you adjust that height so you have a long spine. Just kind of notice you might feel a little bit more tension in the back. Maybe you feel compression now. Maybe your femur bone is pressing into your hip bone. So you might need to make your knees wider. Maybe you have compression in the front of flesh on flesh, right? Maybe you have a larger chest, larger belly, and that's getting in the way of you laying forward, right? So make your knees a little bit wider if that's okay for your knees, and then allow that to come between the legs. And then walk your arms out in front of you. See how that feels. And then walk those hands back toward your feet. Notice how that feels. So again, depending on the day, depending on what areas are tight, depends on what is going to feel best for you. But now you have a little bit more knowledge about what each one feels to help you for that. So then bring those hands back by your shoulders. Come forward, hands and knees. And if you know that you can't go all the way to the floor, you can't sit on your heels, keep the bolster there. Maybe the next step is, can you sit on your heels? Vajrasana. So not Virasana, but Vajrasana. So sitting on the heels, right? The pose of the sage. And if this is too much in the knees, if this is too much on the ankles, you also have another option for the ankles to place a little blanket under the shins, so that those ankles then kind of roll off the backside so that there's not as much compression. So you have that as an option, right? So you can always play with that as well. And then from there, see how that feels to lengthen forward. See what it feels like to keep those knees together, right? You might not be able to get all the way down. I can't get all the way down when my knees are together. I need extra space for parts of my body that have more flesh. So my head on a bolster, on a block, feels way better when I am in this position. And then just see how it feels with the arms. Place them in different positions. Place the legs in different positions. Just kind of explore what your child's pose would be, on the ground. Maybe you need your legs wider to feel more length in the side waist. Maybe you still need the bolster or the block underneath your forehead to feel more length and neutralness in the spine. Maybe your arms like to go forward so you can push your hips back. So just kind of explore, be curious what's best for your body. Good, go ahead and bring yourself forward. Hands and knees. Are there any questions or comments on that? Everybody find a good place to be? Anybody find something different that they're like, whoa, not yet? All right, it's coming. Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're on hands and knees. Next, we're gonna come into standing. So slowly make your way to standing. So you're gonna stand up on your mat. And then what I'd like you to do is once you're standing, I just want you to make one lap around your mat and then come to the middle of your mat and just stand, right? So you're just gonna walk along the edge of your mat, doesn't matter which direction. Just gonna take a little journey around your mat. And then when you get to the middle, go ahead and just stand. Don't really think about it. And just stand there. And then take a look at your feet. Kind of notice what happened with your feet. Don't change them, just notice, right? So this is probably neutral for you, where your feet are. Now your feet might be slightly externally rotated. Not a problem. That could come from the knee, that could come from the hip, that could come from the ankle, right? Maybe they're slightly internally rotated. Maybe they're a little bit wider than your hips. Not a problem, right? So just notice how this feels, right? This neutral position for you in standing. This might be where you want to be during all your poses, right? So when people say always bring your feet together or always bring your feet hip distance apart, maybe hip distance apart isn't for you. Maybe you're somewhere in between. That's where you feel most stable, right? So when you're going through this, same idea when you go to balancing, right? So now you're in this Tadasana, this straight standing pose, right? And just slightly bend your knees and kind of feel the grounding of the feet. And keep the knees just slightly bent, shift your weight to your left leg, and then just lift your right leg. See if you found a little bit more balance because your legs were in neutral before you started. Good, and then place that right foot down. Good, and just kind of notice, rock your feet back and forth, come to that neutral position for you. And then bend into those knees again. Good, find the weight, find the balance, shift slightly to the right, and lift that left leg. Notice if that was easier, right, than what it's normally been because you're now balanced. Good, and then coming back down. So kind of thinking about that all the time in your Tadasana, right, where your feet are. So it's okay for them to be slightly externally rotated if that's what's for you. It just might mean that your hip sockets are more toward the outside of your hips. So for you to be internally rotated to make them parallel feels weird. Right, so we're going to play with that a little bit. So take your feet now, so they're normal. Take your toes, point them out, and keep your heels in, but bring your heels as close as you can together. And your toes out, kind of like you want to get in that first position for ballet. Some of you are like, yeah, no problem, I did ballet. But some of you might feel this in your backs. You might feel it in your hips here, right? So if somebody is normally internally rotated and you make them do feet hip distance in parallel, this could be what you're feeling, right? That compression, right? But if this feels fine, okay. If you don't feel anything in the knees, I feel it in the knees here the most for me, right? So then bring your feet back to normal, kind of walk in place, bring them back to neutral. Notice how that feels again. And then this time I want you to bring your big toes to touch and your heels out wide. And notice how that feels. Now that might feel really weird. I definitely feel that in my knees. I feel it across my hips on the outer upside here. So if I had to do a sun salutation with this, I totally could not, right? I'm like, something's wrong, right? So let's just try that for a moment, right? We're not gonna really go all the way down, we're just gonna go halfway down. So inhale, bring the arms up. As you exhale, just come halfway, reach the arms wide. Good, and just pause. Just notice how it feels kind of a little strange, right? Maybe in the hips, in the knees. And then inhale, bring those arms back up. And exhales down. Good, come out of that. Wiggle it around. So there's nothing wrong with holding that for a couple breaths or whatever we did to play around with it, but noticing what feels best to you, right? So then just coming to that neutral position. So kind of thinking about that when you're doing different poses, right? See maybe what it feels like sometimes to just take a wider stance. Maybe your hips, you've done a lot of internal rotation, maybe you've done a lot of sitting, maybe you've done a lot of cycling, and you just have outer hip pressure. So if you make them wider, that's going to help a little bit rather than keeping them more narrow. So there you go. So next we're going to talk about our hands, right? So we've got our feet. So kind of just notice what felt good for your feet. Make a mental note of that. Actually look at them, see what looks good. Take a little mental picture, right? And then we're going to come down to our hands and knees, all right? So go ahead and come down onto your mat, hands and knees. And then taking a look at your hands, right? I'm going to face kind of forward so you can see my hands a little bit more. When you're on your hands, right? So we're on our hands for table, we're on our hands for plank, we're on our hands for downward dog, any arm balances, right? So kind of just check your hands and just kind of notice when you put them down what you kind of normally do, right? Just what normally I say, right? Wrist creases to the top of the mat, fingers spread wide, shoulder width apart. Those are the cues. That's to kind of get you to general shape. But some of you, maybe your shoulders don't really open wide, right? So think about and just play with, turn it so that your pointer finger points out to the sides of your mat. See how that feels, right? See how that feels in your shoulders, right? Just check it out, right? Maybe bring your hands less wide. Maybe bring them a little closer together. Can you actually grip the mat now? Can you actually press into those finger pads, right? Good, and then now maybe even make your hands as wide as your mat. See how that feels. So you're externally rotating those arms, you're externally rotating the hands, and just kind of notice how that feels. Like maybe you're like, oh, I have more space, because maybe you have a very broad collarbone, and by having your hands shoulder width apart pinches that collarbone sometimes. All right, just notice how that feels. And then keep the hands externally rotated, but bring your hands in narrower. See how that feels. Just kind of notice that sensation. Right? So when your hands are more externally rotated, those elbows, those eyes of your elbows are going to be pointing forward more than if you internally rotate them. So now just kind of see how that feels. So turn your hands back to neutral, and then take that pointer finger and actually instead of your pointer finger, have your first or even your ring finger point to the top of your mat. So that's more internally rotating those hands. This feels very strange to me. Right, and press down to that, just see how that feels. Maybe you do have more room in your upper back, maybe you need that. Right, and then take those hands, bring them closer together. See how that feels. So you might feel more muscle engagement here, right? So I feel a little bit more along my triceps and my shoulders here when I internally rotate, trying to hold my weight. And then take them wide. See if that might feel like, hey, I'm about to do a push-up, right? That's kind of like the push-up sensation that you need. So just kind of notice. Good, and then sit back on your heels for a moment. Give those wrists a little shake. Good, and so now we're gonna apply kind of what felt good to you in downward facing dog, right? So we're gonna start with our feet and work our way to our hands and just see how that feels, right? So we've done the feet, we've done the hands, we know what feels good for our hips, for our shoulders, kinda. So we're gonna get more now weight bearing in our hands, right? So from here, you're gonna come into downward facing dog. So come forward, do normal the cues, or come forward to plank. Good, find your plank, and then lift your hips, downward dog. Right, let's start with our feet. Actually, let's start with our hands since we're on our hands. So notice what felt best to you and go to that right now. So whatever it was, externally rotating or internally rotating, and pause there for a moment. And if you're not sure, we can play around together, right? So take your hands wide as your mat. Turn your pointer finger more out toward the side of your mat and see how that feels. Can you lift your hips back more? Can you bend your knees more? Does it feel more now like a resting position, or do you feel like it's still work? It's always going to be work, don't worry. Downward dog is not a resting position. Good, just take a breath there. Good, and then take those hands, maybe keep them externally rotated, but bring them narrower. Bring them maybe a little closer than shoulder width apart. How does that feel? Is it more work? Is there compression? Is there tension? Good, and then bring them internally, rotate them a little bit, so have that middle finger or first finger point to the top of the mat, and notice how that feels. Good, and then come down and rest. Come down all the way down to the elbows. Give those wrists a little shake. Good, and then come back to center. Shift forward, right? And then find what alignment works for you. And then lift those hips, press it back. So bend the knees, so you were just checking in with the arms. So can you find length in the side waist? Can you feel like your head is growing long, your spine is growing long from tailbone to head? And do you feel stable in your arms? Yes, there is muscle engagement, but do you feel more stable, more open, so it feels like you're getting a good stretch? Good, and then look to your feet, right? So walk your feet in toward your hands. See if you can bring your heels together and see how that feels. Kind of like Mary Poppins. Right? And then keep the feet with the heels in, but take the feet wide as your mat. See how that feels. And then keep the feet wide, but bring the feet parallel. See how that feels. Good, and then bring the feet hip distance, maybe even turn the toes in a little bit. See how that feels. You might find some compression in the hip there. Good, and then come down to the knees, bring those elbows down, roll the wrists, take a moment. Kind of notice what felt right. So we're going to add hands and feet together to see if you can find more length in your downward facing dog. So going to bring those hands in, find your plank, and then lift those hips. Find your hands, find your feet that feels best to you. So it might be a little bit wider, it might be a little bit narrow, it might be turned in, it might be turned out. Make a mental note of how that feels in your body. Good, and remember that. Bend your knees slightly. Walk your feet back one, maybe half of a foot length of back. So maybe 2 or 3 inches back. So you're a longer downward dog. What does that feel like? More muscular action? Harder? More core? And then walk those feet back to where it feels normal. And then take a little half a foot step forward. See how that feels. Does that feel better, or do you have more rounding in the upper back so it's hard to find length? You want to be able to push the hips back without those hamstrings getting in the way. So then come back to neutral, whatever is neutral for you. Take an inhale and exhale. Good, go ahead and come down onto those hands and knees. Find your child's pose that's going to best serve you now, and take a couple breaths. Those hands and knees, and then slowly just make your way up to standing. We are going to talk about those standing poses. So a lot of alignment cues, I do it, other instructors do it. Your legs are going to be nice and wide on your mat, and I always say as wide as your arms are long, super wide. But for some of you, you might have this big femur bone all of a sudden now because of your hip socket is pressing on your hip bone, right? And you can't make them wide. Totally fine. Keep them shorter, right? So if you're feeling if you're trying to open your legs wider and you're feeling the tightness on the outside, it means you have compression. So there's something hitting on it. If you feel the tension on the inside when you're going wide, that just means you need to loosen those inner thighs or the hamstrings, right? So tension can be relieved, compression, you kind of got to modify according to that. So whatever feels best to you. right? So we have that wide leg forward bend, right? So your legs are wide, depending on how wide you want them to go. Some people, if you need more of that inner thigh stretch, you go wider, right? If you don't want as much, you go less, right? So it's your body, you get to decide the intensity of your poses. So going into warrior two, right? So turn your right leg out, and then the normal cue is front heel, back arch, and line. And that might be too tight for some people. That might already, if you can't externally rotate your front hip, so if I were to come forward at you, right? So if I'm here and I'm not externally rotated and this kind of sits here all the time, we're told that's bad. So what you could do is heel toe your foot over to the right and then engage this leg, right? So imagine you're just engaging these muscles here, maybe even press on your knee to draw it out. Now you're open, right? You're opening those hips, right? You're not having a lot of tension on this inner knee. You're having that engagement of your whole leg, right? So you can walk your feet, right? So they're heel to heel alignment rather than heel to arch. So you have that as a possibility. And then again, your front knee doesn't always have to be right over your front ankle. It can go a little bit past even. It's meant to do that, right? When we walk upstairs, we do that ergonomically. Our knees go past our toes, right? So it's okay to go deeper. If you want to build strength, go deeper, go forward. But be careful of whose class you're on, because some teachers make you hold this a long time and you'll really build strength or soreness. So play with that on the other side. And the other side might be a whole different ballgame, right? Maybe on this side when you bend into warrior two, you can line up heel to arch, not a problem. Maybe it feels better, heel to heel, right? But what you want to do is press your hand on your outside of your leg and push out. And then engage the inside, so you're hugging those muscles together. Now imagine you're pushing your knee forward, but then also imagine you're drawing your heel back, so that whole area is engaged, right? So when you're putting weight on your joints, you want all your muscles engaged, right? There's some people that are super flexible and they hang out in their joints, and you might know a couple instructors are like that. They can get way down here in warrior two, but they're just kind of hanging out in their joints. They're not really engaging their muscles. I like to use, as you know, I like to use my muscles. I like us to build strength in the videos. I think yoga is great for building strength. So I like to hold out of my pose just a little bit to engage the muscles more. Good, so go ahead and relax that leg. Come back to neutral. And again, you're neutral for even this pose, right? If you noticed with your Tadasana that you were slightly externally rotated, maybe it feels better to be slightly externally rotated here. Same principles apply for engagement. You're still pressing down and away with the pinky toe. You're still lifting up through your inner thigh. You're still sending your sit bones back, but maybe your feet are slightly adjusted, right? So same idea with triangle pose, right? Triangle pose can get a little tricky. So turn your right toe out. And again, notice how it feels. This is where your knee should be in line with your toes, right? So maybe you don't rotate out all the way. Maybe your toes kind of point a little bit toward that left side of your mat. Maybe again you walk your foot out so you're heel to heel alignment, right? So just kind of notice where that front knee goes when it's engaged, right? So my leg, technically I should be slightly internally rotated here. That's better for me, right? And then you're going to take that right hip, draw it in as your left hip draws back. Notice if you feel any compression in this right hip. If you do, you might have to move that leg in or out so that you can find more length here, right? So you might feel stretch on the outside or on the underside, or you might feel compression on the front. Then you have this nice little stretch on your back hip too, right? So you have those two areas coming into play. And just breathe there, notice. Good, then put a little bend into the front knee, push yourself up, and turn those toes back to neutral. Ha, second side. Turn out that left toe. Just kind of notice how it feels. So when you go straight like you are cued to do, if you feel any tension or pulling on the inside of the knee, those are the ligaments. And it's fine to have a little bit of stress on those, but repetitively, again and again, it's not good for the ligaments, right? So you can hold them in yin poses away, but you don't want to work them that way. So just kind of notice where you need to adjust, right? Good. And then hands to your hips, draw that left hip back. Notice that this side you have a little bit more compression, and and then adjust. You can always adjust from your heel or from your toe. Good, and then noticing that outer hip stretch on the back. Awesome, and then come back up. Come back to neutral. Take a moment. Awesome. So then so those are some open hips. So anytime you're opening your hips and turning them to the side, so you have all those other poses. So I wanted to do a bent leg, so warrior two. We did a straight leg triangle. But you also have Utthita Trikonasana, right? So you have that extended side angle. You would have also reverse warrior, right? You would have reverse triangle, right? The same alignment would apply to your legs in those poses that applied to those two poses, right? So now we're gonna go a little bit more of closed hip, which they're not really totally closed hip, but they kind of can be. First one, crescent pose. So right foot forward, I'm gonna face you for this one, left foot back. So when you're in crescent pose, you want your feet, right, in line with your hips to whatever's gonna feel best to you. You don't wanna be on a tightrope, you wanna be side by side. You wanna be in front, right? And then your knees drawing forward, your back legs active, you're lifting, right? So if I were to be this way then, right, you're lifting, you can bend your back knee. That's gonna be a deeper stretch for this. But if you want to really power up the hamstring, we don't get a lot of hamstring work. You wanna power it up, imagine like you're pulling that hamstring back behind you. You're gonna get a lift in the chest here, and then you can even go deeper into that front knee, right? And then your arms, right, can go any direction. We'll talk about arms in a moment. So let's just keep our hands on our hips for a moment. And just notice how that feels. Good, and then straighten that leg. And then turn to the other side. Notice that that side needs a little bit different adjustment. Right, I know that like on my right leg I can wiggle back more. I have more openness in my right hip than I do in my left. And I just notice that. I try to balance them out when I can. Good, and then come back to center. Next one, warrior one, right? So with warrior one, you have a little bit of external rotation of the back leg, right? So it's not out like warrior two, so it's not like warrior two here, it's just slightly externally rotated because you want your hips to kind of face to the top corner of your mat. So if I were in warrior one, my front knee is gonna be kind of the same, right? That hip distance. And then the back leg, I'm gonna walk it out, and then it's gonna kind of face to the front. The more you can actually walk that foot, my blanket's in the way. The more you can walk that foot out to the side a little bit, the more you're gonna feel those hips pivot, right, toward that direction of the front top of your mat, than if you keep it in closer to you, right? You might even feel it more on your knee. So just kind of play with that alignment when you're coming forward. So it's either hip distance or maybe a little bit wider, right? So your right foot's forward, your left foot's back, and just kind of notice that. Notice how that feels. Again, any of that tension on the inner knee is over a time and time and time in a flow class could be harmful unless you take care of it. And then come out of that and switch sides. Notice how that feels. Pressing into that back heel, bending into the front knee. And just notice the engagement you need of the glutes, of the back leg, you're pressing down. And then just play with it. Maybe you walk your feet a little wider. Maybe closer. Good, and then come back to neutral. Pausing there. Now talking about hands, right, arms. So go ahead and come back to standing, whatever is best for you. So just take a moment, hands by the side, turn your palms up, and then inhale, take your arms up, and there's gonna be a point to where you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna start to lift your shoulders up toward your ears, because you're kind of tight through here, right? It's okay, you can lift those, but then what you wanna try and do is you wanna try and then create space, so then you wanna kind of let them go out. So some people can let them go out and keep their palms together and their arms straight. Other people can't because they're tighter up here, they have more muscle up here, maybe they have shoulder surgery, maybe their hips, their shoulder sockets are very similar, like they have less depth in the shoulder socket. The shoulder socket has a lot more mobility than the hip socket. It can go a lot more directions. So just kind of play with what feels good to you. So in all those different poses where you're reaching up, now when we go through our poses, when we go through our flow, it's gonna feel a little bit different, but your arms, like, you can go wider. You can even go wider. It depends on what you're feeling. So if you're feeling tightness across your chest, maybe you bring your arms more forward, right? Maybe you're here for your warrior. If you're feeling more tension in your upper back, maybe they come back more and your elbows bend, right? So you have those options of where your arms go. Yes, there's this aesthetic look because people are flexible, the people that are taking these poses of this pose for warrior one, your arms should be straight and they should be overhead and you should be lifting up and your knees should be parallel. Well, that person can do that. I know I can't, right? It's great when you look at different people practice in class, everybody's different. So I like that about that. Work on a little flow here. So decide which is gonna be your top of your mat and come to the top of your mat. Find your neutral position with your feet. Close your eyes for a moment and exhale fully. Good, remind yourself of that intention to be aware in your body. We'll go with our breath. Inhale, takes your arms up. Exhale, fold. Bend the knees if you need. Inhale, hands to shin lengthen. Exhale, refold. Press down into the feet. Inhale, takes the arms up. And exhale, hands to heart. Good. Coming into a balancing pose. So we're going to balance on our right foot first. So hands can come to your hips if you need. Bend slightly into those knees. Take your left knee up toward the ceiling. So bend that left knee, lift the left foot. Take the left knee out to the side. And take that left foot into your right leg. Good. Press everything together. Lift up through the chest. Take those arms maybe up. Notice how you feel in those arms. Good. Maybe the arms press together. Maybe they go forward. Maybe they stay like cactus. All right, take another breath. Good. Hands can stay reaching for balance. You're going to take that left leg out to the side. Left knee to center. Take an inhale there. As you exhale, step that left foot back. Hands come to the floor. Find a low lunge. Good. So pause there. Draw in through the belly. You have a nice low lunge here. Check your alignment for your feet. Make sure you're not on a tightrope. And then draw in through the low belly. Lift the chest. Find that crescent lunge. And so you're lifting up through the belly, really powering up the back leg. Feeling the sensations in the leg. Feeling the sensations get stronger. And then check in with the shoulders. Notice where those arms feel best. Keeping the engagement in the core. And then either keep the arms reaching or bring your hands to your heart or hips. Take that back foot, bring it to the ground so that your heel can come to the ground for warrior one. All right, so you still have a little bit of closeness. It's not as closed as before. Good, and then take those arms back up again. Maybe you find a little bit more openness here. Maybe it's less because that left hip is slightly back. Take another big inhale here. Exhale. Inhale, hands to heart. Exhale, open up warrior two. So adjust your feet. Find your warrior two. Find out what works best for you. Once you're there, pause. And then find that engagement on the outer side of your knee, the inner side of your knee. Imagine you want to push your knee forward. And then imagine you want to draw your heel back so your whole leg is engaged. Good. Keeping that engagement in the leg. All you're going to do is straighten it. Take an inhale, straighten that leg. As you exhale, send that left hip to the left. Find your length in your sideways. And then your right hand comes down, left arm comes up. Draw in through the low belly. Roll the shoulders back, press into those legs. Take an inhale. Exhale. Inhale, bends into the front knee. Exhale, come back, warrior two. Good, so you have that warrior two alignment. And then your choice, either elbow to thigh, hand to a block on the inside or the floor. So you have that same alignment for your knees. And your legs, take that top arm, reach it up, and then over the top. So if you're finding compression in your shoulder, maybe your arm needs to come more forward instead of back behind you. Good, take another breath. Inhale, top arm reaches up. Exhale, press yourself back up, warrior two. Good, take an inhale. And then as you exhale, cartwheel the hands down to the floor, square that back hip, pause there. Find that low lunge. Good. Either drop the back knee or keep that left hand on the floor, or left hand will stay on the floor, but maybe drop the back knee and take the right arm to the ceiling. So find a twist. We've been doing a lot of standing. We've been breathing into that low back, so let's find a little twist and lengthen it out. Take another breath there. And then take that right hand to the floor. Good, plant the hands, shift the hips back, find plank, and then find downward facing dog. Find your downward facing dog. 5 full breaths here, find what works for you. Find the length in the spine, being able to press down and forward. Pressing those hips up and back. Your tailbone lifts as your heels press back toward the mat. They do not have to touch the mat. And then can you find more length in your neck? Take another full inhale here. Exhale. Inhale, look forward. As you exhale, you're going to walk, hop, or step, both feet forward. Inhale, lengthen the top of your mat. Exhale, fold. Inhale, takes those arms all the way up. And exhale, hands to heart. Good, pause there for a moment, hands by your side. Checking in. Taking a deep breath. And then allow the eyes to open. Look down at your feet. Just notice what they're doing. No need to adjust them, right? So notice what neutral is for you. One thing you do always want to make sure is making sure that like your right foot's not, your toes aren't back by your heel. Like you actually are, your toes should be on the same plane-ish, right? And then let's do the other side. Good, take a nice deep inhale here. And sigh it out. Good, find your weight onto that left leg. And start to lift your right knee up to the ceiling. Good, and then as you inhale, draw that right knee out to the side. And then as you exhale, draw that right foot anywhere into the left leg. Good, pausing there, hands can be at heart, at hips, maybe they start to reach, finding your tree. Good, and just noticing the foundation of you pressing down and lifting up, keeping with your breath. And again, your choice, arms can stay reaching or hands come to heart. You're going to inhale, take that right knee out to the side. Exhale back to center. Take an inhale there. And then as you exhale, you're going to start to send that right leg back. Bring your hands to the floor, find a low lunge. So check that your feet are on railroad tracks, so they're wider than a tightrope, so they're on either side of the midline of your mat. Good, keep your back heel lifted, use your core, inhale, takes those arms up, come up to crescent. So again, just kind of notice where it is for your shoulders. If you're tighter in the shoulders, arms are going to reach forward a little bit more. As you work through that tension of the shoulders, right, you're going to be able to bring them back. If you have anything stopping you, like your shoulder joint, maybe your shoulder joint, you're having compression, bend the elbows or take them wider. Good, take another breath there. Exhale. Good, inhale, hands to heart. As you exhale, lean forward, take that back foot, drop it to the ground for warrior one. Draw in through the low belly, and then inhale, take those arms back up. Exhale, notice how that feels on that right side. So you're trying to draw your right ribs forward, not necessarily your right hip. Your right hip's open toward the right side of your mat, toward the top. But your right ribs are trying to line up toward the front. Notice how your arms feel. Take another breath. Exhale, hands to heart. Inhale, open it up, warrior two. Good, so finding that adjustment, so you might need to make your legs wider, shorter, whatever you need to do, and then pause there. And again, imagine you're drawing your heel back toward the back of your mat. As you press your knee forward, touch the outside of your knee, touch the inside of your knee so your whole leg is engaged, and breathe into it. Good. Good, keeping that activity in the leg. Straighten the front leg on your inhale. So your right hip pushes back. Exhale, lengthen that left side waist. Left hand goes down, right arm goes up. And again, sometimes we try to draw this right shoulder back too far. Maybe you just draw it back slightly, right? You're rotating through the chest. So there's a little bit of a twist as well as an inner thigh stretch. Good, take another inhale. Legs are powerful. Exhale. Inhale, looking down. Exhale, bend back into that knee, come back, warrior two. Good, and then from there, either elbow to thigh, hand to block or the floor on the inside, take that top arm straight up to begin. So your legs are nice and strong in that warrior two foundation. And then maybe take that top arm overhead. And again, if you're finding that compression in your shoulder, right there at that shoulder joint, maybe bring the arm forward, but now roll the chest back. Good. Over time, as you lengthen, maybe you can bend your elbow and do what you need to do to get rid of that compression. If you can't get rid of compression, leave it where it is. Maybe the arm stays reaching up. Good. Exhale, look down. Inhale, presses yourself back up, warrior two. Exhale, hold strong in those legs. Good. As you inhale, bring the hands to the floor, turn that back heel up. Pause there in that low lunge. So you have the option again, back knee can come to the ground if you'd like. Plant the right hand down. Maybe it goes a little bit wider for space, and take that left arm up. Find a twist. Leaning away from that front knee. Opening up the chest, find some length and twist in the spine. Another inhale there. Exhale. Inhale, brings that hand to the floor. Exhale, plant down through the hands, step it back, plank. And then back to downward facing dog. Find your downward facing dog. Take 5 deep breaths there. So you're pressing down and forward. You're drawing those shoulder blades apart so those shoulder heads can drop down into their sockets so they can support you. Your low belly's drawing in so your hips lift. And then you're finding length along the back of the thighs and into the calves as those heels press back. Take another breath there. Sigh it out the mouth. Inhale, shift forward, bring your knees down. Find your child's pose that's best going to serve you now. So your child's pose, maybe arms forward, back, maybe a block under your hips or your head. Take 5 deep breaths there. Settle in. Nice full inhale here. And exhale. Good. Inhale, shift your weight forward. Come down to seated. Find a comfortable seat for a moment. We're going to go into Shavasana in a moment, but just take a moment here and just sit. Just kind of notice, maybe notice the different effects in the hips, the knees, the ankles, the shoulders. If you close your eyes, go ahead and let them open. Just take that all in. Just make those mental notes of how your body felt during that practice. Those things that we talked about while we were standing apply for when we're sitting as well. So if you were to do, say, a forward fold, right, and your legs are out and it's too much to keep them close together because that's too much internal rotation or you feel too much pressure on your hips, keep them hip distance apart. Maybe keep them a little bit wider. Same with a wide leg forward fold. Maybe going super wide, puts, like I said, I have tension in my hips here. Maybe a little bit closer is better for me to find that length in my hamstring, that targeted area. So you have to think about what you're targeting in order to do that. Same can kind of go with a twist, right? So a lot of times we take this leg over the top. Maybe that's too much of an internal rotation for you. So you can keep it on the inside. You can even keep this bottom leg bent, and you can keep it on the inside for your twist, right? So you have those options. Also, you can prop your hips up, right? So there's a whole array of things you can even do to make your practice yours for when you're sitting. So from here, I'll let you lay back into Shavasana. Take as much time as you need in it. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for paying attention to what your body needs, what your practice needs. I truly appreciate you tuning in. Drink lots of water, eat your veggies, and wear some sunblock. Take a great Shavasana here, and we'll see you next time. Namaste.